Hey everybody, this is Jim, the Tabletop Engineer, and welcome to a new Let's Paint a Mini video. Actually, tonight I'm going to be painting two miniatures. These are called fire vampires. They're pretty hideous. They're from a game called Cthulhu, Death May Die, that I'm getting all the miniatures painted up because I'm really anxious to play this game. So I'm going to be painting these tonight based on, the game comes with these monster cards which sort of show you how to paint the creature. So it's the one right here, which looks really interesting. It's got yellows and oranges and reds and some blacks. So I'm gonna do my best to get this done. It looks like it's gonna involve some blending, so I think I'm gonna have to do one at a time, because with blending you don't want the paint to dry, so you got to move quick. And so it's yellow in the center and then orange, and then the rest of the body is red. So I'm gonna do one, and if I can do it right, then I'll do the other one. But as you know, on these Paint a Mini videos, I usually just ramble on about something. And so tonight, while I paint, I had an interesting email come from a viewer, not of this channel, the Tabletop Engineer Plays, but of my original channel called the Tabletop Engineer, which is mostly crafting videos. And they were watching, they said they were catching up on all my videos they had just discovered or whatever, and they asked me about my gaming history. Well, I debated, because I know a lot of you may know some of this already, but it was a sincere question. It was more than one question. They wanted to know, how I got into gaming, what my favorite games were, where I started, how I got into this as, like, not a career, but how am I doing right now with the YouTube channel and stuff like that. So all good questions, and definitely something I don't mind sharing, even if it's only one person that wants to know about it. So yeah, I'll let you know how that goes. I'll start talking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shake these paints up real fast, and then I am going to get painting. So sorry for the noise. My gaming history, that's so funny. My gaming history begins back in about 1980. I was in 6th grade, and I don't remember the month. I just remember 6th grade. And I have a memory for grades because I associate music with certain, I remember the music I was listening to, but I also remember teachers. So I can go, oh, I had that teacher, that was this grade. So 6th grade, my dad took me to the mall in Pensacola. I grew up in a town called Pensacola, Florida, which, if you know Florida, this is Florida, and it's at the that's Florida. It's very, very tip of Florida, northwest Florida. And he took me there to the mall, not for any particular reason, just, hey, you want to go to the mall? Yeah, I'll go. I was in 6th grade. I know that there was an arcade there, and I was really into video games. Were just really starting to hit, like the early ones, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, those kind of things. So I probably agreed to go to the mall because I knew there was an arcade there, and I thought my dad might give me a few dollars and I could go play some games while he did whatever it was he was shopping for. He liked to go to Sears, to the Craftsman tool area, and buy tools, which I never understood until I got older, and now I find myself doing the exact same thing. So anyway, Dad took me to the mall, and we walked in, and there was this I don't remember. I remember kind of where it was. I don't remember. It was I believe it was University Mall. I know it was University Mall. And when we walked in, there was we happened to be walking through the mall to Sears, which was on one of the ends. Like, the department stores are usually at the extremities. And we were walking, and there were all these tables set up, not in the center of the mall, but just sort of a little further down. And there were these men. Most of them looked like retired military. Now, I know this sounds bad, horrible to say, but growing up in a military town, I can spot retired military. Or at least I thought I could at the time, and I was pretty good at it. You just learn to sort of spot them. And there were these retired, was that red or orange? No, that was orange. There were these retired men that were standing around these tables, and they were playing they were standing around these tables. These tables were like I don't know. They were covered in. Well, some of them were covered in sand. Some of them were covered in like parchment style paper. I don't know what you would call that. It was a. Did I just do the orange or the red? I feel like I did red. Let me check that orange. Yeah, I did do orange. They were playing a war game. This was the first time I had ever laid eyes on a war game. So I was kind of fascinated because they had all these guys had what do you call it? They had these little soldiers, and they were painted, meticulously painted. Those of you who know historical war games, you probably know what I'm talking about. I mean, these were like 1.5 inch high Napoleonic soldiers. There were different games going on. I don't remember all of them. I don't remember a World War II one, but I do remember like a Napoleonic one because I just recognized the uniforms, and I think I remember somebody talking about Napoleon or talking about something he had done. Well, anyway, my dad saw that I was sort of fascinated with it, and he went off to do his thing, and I stayed there. I think I told him that I was going to go to the arcade afterwards. I just wanted to watch a little more. And I think he may have actually gone to the arcade looking for me, and then when he didn't find me, he returned to the table because I was still there when he was done. And it was probably a good 45 minutes or an hour. So anyway, while I was there, they talked to me, but they were really, really involved in their game, and I don't blame them. I mean, it was fun watching, but they were arguing about rules. These like, whether this unit, was in a certain. They were measuring like crazy. I mean, I don't remember everything they argued, but it was hilarious, and they were friends. You could tell that because they would laugh afterwards, and but they would get into it. And I was totally blown away, but I didn't get into wargaming. I wouldn't get into wargaming for many, many decades. But that was the first memory I have of like war games. So anyway, my dad, he asked a few questions of the guys and stuff, and he could see I was interested, but I think we talked about the costs involved, and back then, 1980, it was outrageous. I mean, there was no way I was going to be able to get into that hobby. It was just very, very expensive. These were retired officers. A lot of them were retired Navy officers, and so they had a nice pension, and they were living in a very low income or low cost town. They had access to what they call the PX or the I forget what they call it, the PX or the just went blank on it, but it's where you could buy like groceries and stuff for much lower price than the rest of us would pay. So they had the money and they had the means to do it. So probably jump forward a few months, and a friend of mine in school came to me one day and said that he had an older brother who had played this game called Dungeons and Dragons. And he'd played it at the Sears, where I happened to be, not too far away. He played it at a Sears in a back room with a bunch of people they were playing this game, and he said it was really hard to describe, that his brother just didn't do a good enough job explaining it, but it sounded really cool, and they welcomed younger players, and he wanted to know if I wanted, and his dad was going to take him and his brother, and he wanted to know if I wanted to go. Well, I liked games, but games to me back then were like, Risk, Monopoly, those kind of things. I really didn't have an understanding of the variety of games that were out there at that young age. So, I don't know, it was a week or two later, we went, and I didn't know what to expect. We went into Sears. I guess the older brother, I remember, knew where we were going. And so we went upstairs, and we went into this, it was like a workroom or a storage area. And there were about, I'm vaguely going by my memory here, I think there were about 5 or 6 tables. And these were like picnic-style tables, not round, but just long rectangular tables. And people were sitting around them, and they were laughing and yelling and, it was very, very loud. And we walked in, and I was kind of like, I kind of felt out of place because we were probably some of the youngest kids there. I'm pretty confident that most everybody else there was, an adult or college age or older. And so we walked in, and somebody saw us and said, "Hey, welcome to I forget the name of it, a gaming club or whatever. Do y'all want to play some games?" And we said, "Yeah, we're here to play some D&D." Well, we didn't call it D&D. We called it, we're here to play Dungeons and Dragons. At least my friend said that. I was just standing in awe watching these people, and there were a variety of people. There were military, non-military. You could tell there were college students and things like that. But anyway, wow, this thing must have burst. That's not good. I wonder what happened here. So somebody, I don't know who, said, "Well, we don't have another dungeon master, and we have no more seats at the D&D tables." But John, I don't remember his name. He said, "John over there is running a similar game if you want to give it a try." And the guy said, "Yeah, come on over. You can play with us." There was I think 3 people at his table. So we walked over, and I don't know, somebody asked, "So what game is this?" And he said, "It's a game called Metamorphosis Alpha. It's a science fiction role-playing game." I don't even know if he called it a role-playing game. He says it's a science fiction game where you're going to play a mutant, or you're going to play a character that has awoken on a starship that has been traveling for thousands of years through radiated space, and you've got mutations, and you're trying to find a way to survive. And the way he pitched it, it was like, "Yes, please." Now, granted, we still wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons because we had heard nothing but good things about it. We'd been told secondhand stories about adventures from some of the older players at school that were like, "Oh, you're talking about D&D? Yeah, I played that. I went and played a game this." And we found an older guy in our school, a couple grades higher than us, I think he was in 8th grade at the time, who was running a campaign, but he didn't want us, he wasn't opening his table to anybody. He would later, I'll come back to him, he would later turn out to be just begging me to let him join our game because I eventually had a lot of friends playing it. But anyway, we played Metamorphosis Alpha, and it was fun. Even this 30, 40 years later, wow, I remember that we were trying to find a source of clean food. I remember that. A source of clean food for our tribe. Our food had become poisonous. We didn't know radiation or whatever, and we were trying to find this special machine or not a machine. We were trying to find this location, if I remember right, that could clean food, and it was probably a machine of some sort. I don't even remember if we found it, mainly because I know we died. I mean, this was back in the day when if you did something stupid or if the dice just weren't in your favor, you died and you rolled up a new character. Well, I think I survived until mostly to the end of the game. We were only going to be there for 2 hours, and it was right towards the end that my character died, and I remember the guy saying, "Well, I'd let you roll up another character, but I think we're going to wrap it up for the night." And so he's like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Yeah, that was pretty fun," and we got to roll dice, and it was a D6 system, if I remember right. And but he's like, "Yeah, you come back anytime and you can play. I love this game. I want to play it some more, and you're always welcome to our table, blah, blah, blah." So we liked it, but we were kind of disappointed. So we said, "Well, we really would like to play D&D next time. Do we need to get here early?" And somebody said, "Yeah, if you come at, we were like 30 minutes late." So he's like, "If you get here at, a little earlier, you'll definitely be able to get a table. We have people that don't show all the time, and we'll fit you in." So my friend and I came back, I think it was the following week. I think my dad was cool and drove us, and went back the following week, and just as they had said, there was a table available. And so 6th grade, I got to play my very first game of D&D. It was, I don't remember the book that the DM was referencing. I am pretty confident it was what they call the Blue Book, the Holmes box. And the only reason I remember that is because he had said something about, well, this book only allows you to go up to level 3. So when you reach level 3, we'll just have you roll up a new character, and we'll do something else. It was something along those lines. So it makes me think that he was running that basic Holmes box. So I liked it. We had fun. I don't even remember much about that night, about what we did, other than it was just really, really cool. And so I think my dad picked up on the fact that we were having a lot of fun. And so that Christmas, and this must have been maybe September, October timeframe, because for Christmas, I had asked my dad, I had asked them for Dungeons and Dragons. And so, keep this in mind. I'm not mad about this. It was kind of funny. At the time, I was a little disappointed, but now I laugh about it. So I was like, I'm getting a D&D game for Christmas. I knew. So Christmas rolled around. I opened the box or the present, and my mom or dad or somebody had bought the wrong game. They bought the Dungeon board game. It was called Dungeon, and some of you may be familiar with it, but it was not Dungeons and Dragons. So I guess I was mature enough that I acted like, oh, this is awesome, thank you. I didn't get mad or anything, and we actually ended up playing Dungeon. I played it with my friends a few times. It wasn't quite what I wanted, but we played it. So meanwhile, somehow I had told my dad, I said, there's this other game I want to pick up, and I saw it in the game store, and can I do some work around the house, blah, 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 to earn some money, whatever. And Dad, he put me to work for like a couple weeks, but a couple weeks later, I went to the game store. It wasn't a game store. It was a Hallmark store, that had a little tiny section in it of games. And I just went blank on the name of the store. I used to know it. Maybe it'll catch me in a minute. So here we go. All done. One fire vampire with the blending on the chest. Not as good as what I was hoping, but I'll take it. Plus he's shooting flames out of his nozzles at the top. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the other one. So anyway, I saved up my money, and I went and bought the Holmes box, and I still have it. I would go get it off the shelf over there, but I don't want to get up and make you wait a few seconds. Well, yeah, I will. Hang on one second. I want to show it to you. Okay, Holmes box. It's right here. It's in pretty good condition. I've had to re-tape and re-glue the edges a little bit, but this is it, the blue book. And so I read this thing, and I read it, and I read it again, and I read it again, but I never could quite grasp the concept of what a DM. There just wasn't much in that book in terms of how to DM a game. So I did my best, and we ran early. I was the DM because nobody else wanted to do it, and I would run them through these most simple, basic dungeons. And the kind, if you played back in those days. It was go in a room, fight the monster, maybe disarm a trap, get some treasure. Go to the next room, fight a monster. It was very simplistic, and that was basically just because of my age and inexperience as a GM and not having life experiences to draw on. So it was really interesting those early days because nobody really understood knew what they were doing. We all just were sort of making it up as we go. And but the thing is I continued to go to the Sears gaming for a while, and I would play because they didn't need any new DMs, and I wasn't volunteering to be a DM because I just didn't know what I was doing. But I would pay attention to the DMs. And so after a while, I felt like I was pretty comfortable with the role. I understood the basic mechanics and combat and stuff like that. And I would ask questions and stuff. And I'd bring the book and ask questions. And so I went to all my friends and I said, hey, man, I'm going to start running D&D. And we would meet at one or other person's house, and this was usually a parent who sort of was cool because there was the whole satanic panic starting to go on. I actually hit D&D and got into it well before the satanic panic, which I think was the next year. But by then, my parents kind of understood what the game was, and they knew it was all, they knew it wasn't bad or dangerous. They actually liked the creativity part of it, and so I had some very, very cool parents. But I also had some friends with some not so cool parents who would call my mom and dad and say, "Do you know what your kid's playing? And you know what they're reading?" And blah blah blah. And my dad would just say, "You know what? It's a game. It's all cool." And but there were some kids that were not allowed to play it. I mean, their parents were just like, "Nope, you are not going to play that game. No way, no, not happening." So long story short, I spent most of my 6th grade and 7th grade year learning how to be a better DM, and I still wasn't a great DM. I mean, I'll be honest. I was very, very. I never felt good about being a DM, but nobody else wanted to do it. So, but I did it because nobody else wanted to. And eventually, that guy, I think his name was Ross. He wanted to join our game because I was running a fairly regular, like at least once a week, if not once a week, once every other week. I was running a fairly consistent game, and I think he was not able to get that. And so he asked to join, and he was older. He was like 2 years older, and a lot of my friends they just didn't feel comfortable like with an older kid playing with us. And so I think I wasn't rude about it. I just was like, I don't know, Ross, I've got to get the other friends to agree. And I think I pawned it off on them. But ultimately, I think he played maybe once with us because he said he had some book or whatever. And it was the Fiend Folio, I think. And we're like, yeah, if you bring the Fiend Folio, we'll let you play a game with us. I think it was the Fiend Folio. It may have been something else. But anyway, so that was how I got started in Dungeons & Dragons, playing the Holmes box, not having a clue what we were doing because there just wasn't a whole lot in that rule book to explain to a new player how to run D&D. I think there was this like 4 or 5 paragraph like sample dialogue of, the DM talking to the players and describing a room, and that was it. That was all you got. Now, with 2nd edition, when the expert and the basic sets came out later, I forget what they called them. I just went blank on it. But the next series that came out were better. They had some stuff in it that would actually sort of lead the DM through it. But I didn't. By that point, I felt confident enough. I didn't need it, and my players were happy. And they would tell me, "Oh no, we want you to DM." And so I guess they liked what I was doing because they never complained and they always wanted me to come back and DM some more. So that lasted mostly through, I think, about 10th grade. And then I started getting into other games. I played Battletech. We played Star Trek, the role-playing game from FASA. That was a big one I had a small group of friends. We were all Star Trek geeks. And so we thought, let's play Star Trek, the role-playing game. And we did, and it was crazy. We build these powerful starships, and everybody wanted to be the captain. Nobody wanted to be the engineer or the navigator, and so we sort of faked it and didn't really play the game as the rules were written. But we did have some combat. Starship combat was fun. By the way, side issue, I bought a game called Starship Battle. Was it Starship Battles? I think it was Starfleet Battles. Excuse me, Starfleet Battles. Very complicated game. I would sit and read the manual and I would almost fall asleep because it was so cryptic and so crazy detailed. And when I showed the manual to some of my Star Trek friends, they were like, nope, not interested. They had no desire to learn that complexity of a game. And I knew I was missing out on a fun game because I had seen it played at the gaming place. I think somebody had been playing it. And I so wanted to play it, but I never could find anybody to do it. I also discovered Call of Cthulhu because I had discovered Lovecraft in the library. Believe it or not, the Satanic Panic was live and well in my little town, but for some reason the librarian never figured out that the Lovecraft stuff was probably worse than anything the D&D was offering us in terms of the, H.P. Lovecraft was not a great guy. I mean, he was racist and his stuff had horrible stuff in it, but the horror was good and the creatures were good. But don't get me started on it. I don't support the man. He was a man of the time, or what's the word you saw? He was of his a person. I can't remember the phrase I'm looking for. It was the time period defined him, and that's unfortunate. He would not be allowed to write some of the stuff today that he was getting away with back then. But he did develop some very, very cool mythos and creatures and horror. And so anyway, I discovered Call of Cthulhu. None of my friends wanted to play it. We played one game. I was the keeper, and they just didn't get it. It took place in the 1920s. You could go insane. You were fighting these creatures that they didn't know what they were. I did, but they didn't know, and they didn't know how horrible they were. And so that just never really took off, which really, I just always regret that because I so wanted to play that game. It wouldn't be until years later that I would get to play Call of Cthulhu, and it would be an older, an older version of it, not the 1.0 version that I had saved and bought in the store. And by the way, I wish I'd never saw. I traded it years ago for some other game that I wanted, and now I regret that I traded my first edition Call of Cthulhu, and it was in perfect condition too. Anyway, high school came and went. College, I did a little bit of gaming in college, but then it fell to the side because I was doing dual majors. I was doing engineering and English. I was swamped, could not keep up with the workload. And doing the gaming, so the gaming had to go. And like anything, when you give up something, if you give it up long enough, you just stop missing it. And that's what kind of happened. Is I would every now and then I would join a game. Somebody would say, "Hey, these guys are playing." I got into Magic when it first released. I never really got into it. I played it because everybody was playing it, and if I wanted to play a game, it wasn't expensive. I mean, it was if you wanted to go buy certain cards by themselves, which that started even at the early days of Magic, when the card shop or the game shop would take a deck or the owner would buy like 50 packs and break them out, and he'd find the cards that were rares and he'd put them in there for $5 or $10. Which, keep in mind, in the late '80s, that was college students couldn't afford $15 for a Black Mana or whatever the card was at the time that was everybody wanted. So. Anyway, got into Magic for a little bit, and then quickly fell out. But every now and then, I'd play a game of D&D. I'd hear somebody was running a game, and I'd say, "Yeah, man, I'd like to play." But I wasn't DMing, which was not ideal. I wanted to DM. So I got out of college, got a job, and life just continued on. And so I would. Gaming got away from me again. I started getting into. I got into video games for a little bit, and not video games, like games like Half-Life and Fear, games that had a story to them, where you were playing a character in a first person and you had to get through. Those were something I could save and pick up later and go to work, but always in the back of my mind, I was missing the Dungeons and Dragons experience. And so one day I happened to go. I was a big Doctor Strange fan, by the way. Even back in the day, even before he became popular, I was huge into Doctor Strange. So one day, I don't know how, I saw in the bookstore a Doctor Strange compendium of like some older comics, and I bought it. And I read it, and I was like, oh, man, I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed Doctor Strange. So I found a comic book store in Houston. That's where I ended up after college, in Houston. And I went in, and I said, I'm looking for some Doctor Strange, similar to this. I had brought the book in and showed him. He's like, yeah, we got some trades and stuff like that. So not only was this a comic book shop, it was also a game store. Well, here I am walking in, and I'm like, Oh my gosh, I'm in a game store because I saw D&D, and I saw other games that I didn't know what they were. And war games this was in the late to mid 90s. War games were starting to pick up again, I guess. Not that they'd ever died, but they were starting to get popular. And so this guy said, yeah, they play D&D on, I think it was Friday nights. And I said, yeah, I might show up. And I think I did show up once or twice to play D&D in Houston. And so life took me from Houston to Atlanta when I got introduced to my fiance, my wife, or my girlfriend at the time. We got married, and I moved to Atlanta, where her job was. She did not want to move to Texas. And she traveled to Houston quite a bit for her job. That's how we met. So anyway, she didn't know about my gaming passion. I mean, because I wasn't playing a lot. And when we started dating, I definitely wasn't playing much because I'd rather spend time with her. We got engaged, and I decided, I worked for myself as a freelance tech writer. I had moved on I had quit the company and hung out my own shingle to become my own boss. And so it was easier for me to move. It was easier for me to say, you know what, I will start over in Atlanta. I didn't have any contacts in Atlanta like I did in Houston. I said, you know what, we'll get married and I will start over. It's cool. And I said, I'll move to Atlanta because I knew she did not want to come to Texas. So moved to Atlanta, had kids. We got married, and a few years later we had kids, and then one day, out of the blue, a friend called me up, and we just started catching up and chatting. And I said, well, what are you doing these days? And he said, well, I've been playing this and this and this. He was still playing some D&D with some old friends, and he said, and there's a new version of D&D coming out. And I said, what? He said, yeah, there's a new version coming out, and we're looking forward to playing it. He said, you ought to look into it. And I said, yeah. I said, I've got young kids. I just don't have time. And he said, well, he goes, they have this organized now. You go 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week on a Wednesday night or whatever night it was. And he said, it's very low commitment. You just show up or don't. And if you don't show up, you just pick up where you left off. He was talking about Adventurers League. This was back in 2014, I believe, or 2013. So I went to a local gaming store. I looked it up, and they said, yeah, we have organized play. And I said, oh, okay. And they said, we're going to start playing D&D 5th edition. And I said, well, he said, have you ever played? I said, yeah, I've played different versions up to 3 or 3.5. I said, but not often, not lately. He said, well, you guys come join us. And I said, okay, let me think about it. And I went and I played. I wasn't a GM. I didn't know the rules. But I sat down and I played a sorcerer, and I loved it. Now, this is 5e, and I had fun. I went and bought the Player's Handbook. I bought the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I bought the Monster Manual because that's all there was at the time. Those books came out within a period of months of each other, but I bought them, and I was playing as a player, not as a DM. But that bug was in the back of my head, and at some point, I remember I went to the coordinator, a friend of mine named Topher, and I said, I would kind of like to maybe try my hand at DMing. I didn't know that at the time they were having such difficulty finding DMs. I thought everybody wanted a DM. I thought I'd have to get on a waiting list to be a DM. And they were like, no, man, come on, you want to be a DM? We got it. We'll make you a table. And it turns out that, there weren't a lot of people that wanted to DM. They all wanted to play. So I was basically dropped in the deep end, man. I hadn't DM'd in years and years. And here I was after just a couple, more than a couple months, probably about 4 or 5 months. After 4 or 5 months of playing 5e, I began being the DM. And so I was back into Dungeons & Dragons. All right, well, that catches you up to how I got into D&D, or back into D&D. How did I get into wargaming? Okay, so for the longest time, I told you I was a tech writer. I was writing books on varieties of subjects. I was writing them on 3D printing, CNC machines, those kind of technologies. And so there is a magazine. It was in publication, then it died, and then it came back. It was called Make Magazine, still available. But I got really into the maker movement. I was going to Maker Faire out in California. I was really into electronics. I could wire up circuits and create my own circuits. So I got really pretty good at it. I like to make things. And so I was out in California, and there was a table of terrain. Some guy had laid out all this terrain he made for Warhammer. I remember it was Warhammer. And I was like, look at this. It was miniatures. It was just crazy buildings and hills and mountains. And I was just like, holy crap, I love this. And we started talking. He's like, yeah, this is a war game. And then it clicked. I was like, this is kind of what those guys were playing back in Pensacola back when I was in 6th grade, a young guy. And I didn't know what they were playing, but they were playing war games. They were moving miniatures and measuring and rolling dice to hits. There was not a role-playing aspect to it. It was just pure, this is my army versus your army, let's see who wins. And so I got to talking with them, and all of a sudden somebody came up, and we just got into a chat about, I was like, well, I really like Dungeons and Dragons. And he's like, oh, you like D&D? And I said, yeah. I said, but I really like the look of this wargaming stuff. I love the idea of making my own terrain and things like that. And he's like, oh, so he goes, well, you know what? You might like, there's a new game that just came out called Frostgrave. He goes, you should check it out. And I said, okay. So I got on Amazon, or I don't remember where I got somewhere, and I found it. And I found the first, but it had just come out. I mean, it was brand new. I don't know how I got lucky, but I got in on the ground floor when Frostgrave was just getting started. I read the rule book in the carpool line. My oldest son was like in 2nd or 3rd grade. I forget what year it was, 2014 or 15. It was around the time I was starting to play D&D again. And so I discovered wargaming at the same time I was getting back into D&D. But I would read this book. I would read this book in the carpool lane, and I so wanted to play it. It didn't have solo rules. You needed an opponent. But I was like, I could probably find an opponent. I found another gaming store in Atlanta that was running war games, and they said, yeah, I think we got some people that play Frostgrave. And they had Warhammer terrain. They didn't have they did have some fantasy terrain. I'm a mess. So long story short, because I wanted to play Warhammer or Frostgrave, but I couldn't find a player right away, I started making terrain. I was at least going to get ready to play. So I was making like tiles and stonework and bridges and that kind of stuff. And so the first time I played Frostgrave, I was hooked. I was like, I love this. And Frostgrave has since led to many, many other games that if you're watching this channel, you know that I'm all over the map when it comes to different games. But Frostgrave is the one that got me into wargaming. And I've come and gone. I've recently just come back to Frostgrave. I'm playing a solo game, a solo campaign right now. But anyway, that's my life story. That's our gaming life story. From being a young kid and seeing these tables, but not really knowing what was going on, and then all the way up to rediscovering D&D 5e. I'm no longer playing 5e. I kind of got what I wanted out of it, and then I had the joy of original D&D, old school D&D, and so now I'm more back into the old school D&D stuff. But it's I love it. I don't want to lose again. I don't want to lose it again. I don't want life to get to a point where I forget to play some games. I missed it, and now that I've rediscovered it, I don't want to ever lose it again. All right, I will take some, once this paint dries, I will take some after pictures of the final creature and post it at the end of this video so that you can see the before and the after. These are called fire vampires. Fire vampires. There you go. And I think I do remember them in a story. But the visualization doesn't, you know, it's like that. It's not what I would have envisioned for it, but that would scare the mess out of me if I ran into something like that in the real world. I would go insane. Yeah, I would lose sanity points. All right, I want to wrap this up. We've been going on 40 minutes. That's long enough. Two in less than 40 minutes. Not bad. The speed paints definitely, and they definitely blend good. I don't know if you can see the yellowing to orange to red on the chest, but it matches, you know, the one on the card somewhat. Close enough. I'm happy with it. All right, that's all I have for tonight. Thanks for joining me on this Paint 2 mini sessions. And thanks for listening to me ramble about my history. It was kind of nice to go back and think about all the things I've seen and done related to gaming in the years. So that was a nice trip down memory lane. All right, I will be back very soon with another Paint a Mini. I'm probably going to. I've got a small number, maybe 4 or 5 more of these miniatures for this game, Cthulhu, Death May Die, to finish before I move on to some other minis. So bear with me. And if you're not liking these, I understand, but I need to get them painted, and these videos allow me to do that. All right, this is Jim, the Tabletop Engineer. I'll be back for another Paint a Mini very soon. Until then, everybody, take care.